When you look at the history of the world, as you have done in your new book, Principles of Dealing with the Changing World Order, what is more important, more impactful, money or power?
They go hand in hand. They support each other and they compete with each other. Those who have money have power, a certain type of power. That power has to do with all that they can buy, but it also has the ability to influence those with political power. So, and so you see this throughout history, this symbiotic relationship. For example, between the royal families, the nobility, and the church. So you see that group of people supporting each other in various ways and then wrestling around with each other for the money and power among that group. So the dynamic that's quite classic is you could look at the parties in power back in, the 16th, 17th centuries. You would look at royal families, nobles, and the church, if you're in Europe. And then you would look at agricultural land, and there was a certain dynamic. And that varies over time. It changes. As those people get thrown out and technology changes. So when the society evolved so that it would produce goods and services, and you have something like the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, you have machines, and you have the talent of people that are off the farms, and then you have a struggling for power. You see that power mix change. And so we don't see that same power mix anymore, but you still see the same dynamic. You see those with money dealing with those who have political power around those assets that are considered most valuable, to particularly the productive assets that produce money.
And political power is usually centered around nation state. So the major locus of power is the nations.
Yes. In 1668, after 30 years of war, there was the development of nation states. Before then, it was really the development of countries as we know it, that there were borders, and that within those borders, those who had control got to control it, and there were not to be intrusions in those borders, and that's how we established the nation state. And then, of course, within each country, there is levels. There is a central level, and then there is typically a province or state level down below, and then there's a municipal level, so they each have different levels of power, and it's the coordination of those that determines how the country is run.
Let me completely shift topics on something that's fascinating.
It's all the same topic, but great.
Everything is interesting. What do you think about what the hell is money? And the recent excitement around cryptocurrency that brings to the forefront the philosophical discussion of the nature of money. Are you bullish on cryptocurrency? Are you excited about it? What does it make you think about how the nature of money is changing?
No one knows what money is. Probably no one ever knew. Go back to medieval times. Bills of exchange. Were they money? Maybe it's just a semantic debate. Gold, silver. What about copper coins? What about metals that were considered legal tender but not always circulating?
Yeah.
What about credit? So being confused about moneyness is the natural state of affairs for human beings. And if there's more of that, I'd say that's probably a good thing. Now, crypto per se, I think Bitcoin has taken over a lot of the space held by gold. Mm-hmm. That to me seems sustainable. I'm not short Bitcoin. I don't have some view that the price has to be different than the current price, but I know it changes every moment. I am deeply uncertain about the less of crypto, which seems connected to ultimate visions of using it for transactions in ways where I'm not sure whether it be, prediction markets or DeFi. I'm not sure the retail demand really is there once it is regulated like everything else is. I would say I'm 40-60 optimistic on those forms of crypto. That is, I think it's somewhat more likely they fail than succeed, but I take them very seriously.
So we're talking about it becoming one of the main currencies in the world. That's what we're discussing.
That I don't think will happen.
So, but the reality is that Bitcoin used to be in the single digits of a dollar, and now has crossed $50,000 for a single Bitcoin. Do you think it's possible it reaches something like $1 million?
I don't think we have a good theory of the value of Bitcoin. If people decide it's worth $1 million, it's worth $1 million.
But isn't that money? Like you said, isn't the ultimate state of money confusion, or however beautifully you put it?
It's like valuing an Andy Warhol painting. So when Warhol started off, probably those things had no value.
Yeah.
The sketches, early sketches of shoes. Now a good Warhol could be worth over 50 million.
Yeah.
That's an incredible rate of price appreciation. Bitcoin is seeing a similar trajectory. I don't pretend to know where it will stop. But it's about trying to figure out, well, what do people think of Andy Warhol? He could be out of fashion in a century. Maybe yes, maybe no. But you don't think about Warhols as money. They perform some money-like functions. You can even use them as collateral for like deals between gangs. But they're not basically money, nor is Bitcoin. And the transactions velocity of Bitcoin, I would think, is likely to fall, if anything.
So you don't think there will be some kind of phase shift? Will it become adopted and become mainstream for the trend for one of the main mechanisms of transactions?
Bitcoin, no. Now, Ether has some chance at that. I would bet against it, but I wouldn't give you a definitive no.
And you would.
Bitcoin is too costly. It may be fine to hold it like gold, but gold is also costly. You have smart people trying to make, say, Ether much more effective as a currency than Bitcoin. And there's certainly a decent chance they will succeed.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation. I mean, with smart contracts, with NFTs as well, there's a lot of interesting innovations that are plugging into the human psyche somehow, just like money does. Money seems to be this viral thing, our ideas of money, right? And if the idea is strong enough, it seems to be able to take hold. Like there's network effects that just take over. And I particularly see that I'd love to get your comment on Dogecoin, which is basically by a single human being. Elon Musk has been created. It's like these celebrities can have a huge ripple effect on the impact of money. Is it possible that in the 21st century, people like Elon Musk and celebrities, I don't know, Donald Trump, The Rock, whoever else, can actually define, the currencies that we use? Maybe can Dogecoin become the primary currency of the world?
I think of it as like baseball cards. So right now, every baseball player has a baseball card. And the players who are stars, their cards can end up worth a fair amount of money.
Yeah.
And that's stable. We've had it for many decades. Sort of the player defines the card. They sign a contract with Topps or whatever company. Now, could you imagine celebrities, baseball players, LeBron James, having their own currencies instead of cards? Absolutely. And you're somewhat seeing that right now, as you mentioned, artists with these unique works on the blockchain. But I'm not sure those are macroeconomically important. If it's just a new class of collectibles that people have fun with, again, I say bring it on. But whether there are use cases beyond that challenge fiat monies, which actually work very well. Yeah. Yesterday, I sent money to a family in Ethiopia that I helped support. In less than 24 hours, they got that money.
Digitally. Yes.
No, so not digitally, through my bank, my primitive dinosaur bank, BB&T, Mid-Atlantic Bank, headquartered in North Carolina, chartered by the Fed, regulated by the FDIC and the OCC. Now, you could say, well, the exchange rate was not so great. I don't see crypto as close to beating that once you take into account all of the last mile problems. Fiat currency works really well. People are not sitting around bitching about it. And when you talk to crypto people, the number who have to postulate some out of the blue hyperinflation, where there's no evidence for that whatsoever, that to me is a sign they're not thinking clearly about how hard they have to work to outcompete fiat currency.
There's a bunch of different technologies that are really exciting that don't want to address how difficult it is to outcompete the current accepted alternative. So, for example, autonomous vehicles. A lot of people are really excited.
Yeah.
But it's not trivial to outcompete Uber on the cost and the effectiveness and the user experience and all those kinds of...
Correct.
Sorry, Uber driven by humans.
Yes.
And it's not, that's taken for granted, I think. That, look, wouldn't it be amazing? How amazing would the world look when the cars are driving themselves fully? It's going to drive the cost down. You can remove the cost of drivers, all those kinds of things. But it's when you actually get down to it and have to build a business around it, it's actually very difficult to do. And I guess you're saying your sense is similar competition is facing cryptocurrency. Like you have to actually present a killer app reason to switch from fiat currency to Ethereum or to
and the
whatever.
Biden people are going to regulate crypto, and they're going to do it soon. So something like DeFi, I fully get why that is cheaper, or for some can be cheaper than other ways of conducting financial intermediation. But some of that is regulatory arbitrage. It will not be allowed to go on forever, for better or worse. I would rather see it given greater tolerance. But the point is, banking lobby is strong. The government will only let it run so far. There'll be capital requirements, reporting requirements imposed, and it will lose a lot of those advantages.
Can I ask you a pothead question, which is, what is money, man? So if we just kind of zoom out and look at, because I'd love to talk to you about cryptocurrency, which perhaps could be the future of money. In general, how do you think about money? You said numeri, the vision, the goal is to manage the world's money. What is money in your view?
I don't have a good answer to that, but it's definitely in my personal life, it's become more and more warped. And you start to care about the real thing, like what's really going on here. Elon talks about things like this, like what is a company really? And it's like it's a bunch of people who like kind of show up to work together and like they solve a problem, and they might not be a stock out there that's trading that represents what they're doing, but it's not the real thing. And being involved in crypto, like I put in crowd sale of Ethereum and all these other things and different crypto hedge funds and things that I've invested in, and it's just kind of like, it feels like how I used to think about money stuff is just like totally warped. Because you stop caring about like the price, and you care about like the product.
So, but the product, you mean like the different mechanisms that money is exchanged? I mean, money is ultimately a kind of little, on one, it's a store of wealth, but it's also a mechanism of exchanging wealth. But that, like, what wealth means becomes a totally different thing, especially with cryptocurrency, to where it's almost like these little contracts, these little agreements, these transactions between human beings that represent something that's bigger than just like cash being exchanged at 7-Eleven, it feels like.
Yeah. Maybe I'll answer what is finance. It's what are you doing when you have the ability to take out a loan? You can bring a whole new future into being with finance. If you couldn't get a student loan to get a college degree, you couldn't get a college degree, like if you didn't have the money. But now, like, weirdly, you can get it all you have is this like loan, which is like, so now you can bring a different future into the world. And that's how when I was saying earlier about if you rerun American history, economic history without these things, like you're not allowed to take out loans, you're not allowed to have derivatives, you're not allowed to have money. It just doesn't really work. And it's a really magic thing, how much you can do with finance by kind of bringing the future forward.
Finance is empowering. It's we sometimes forget this, but yeah, it enables innovation. It enables big risk takers and bold builders that ultimately make the. You are one of the most prolific drug smugglers in history. What would you say motivated you? Money, power, the thrill, or was it something else?
Money.
But isn't there a point where you've had more money than you can possibly know what to do with? Or is it always more money?
You know, I had plenty of money several times. And I think it's sort of like if you was in Las Vegas and you had the slot machine handled down and the gold coins was tumbling around you and you had sweepers bagging them up, when would you let it go?
But isn't some part of that the thrill then?
Oh, there was a lot of thrill, sometimes way too much.
You made certainly tens of millions of dollars, probably much more. What memorable experience did having that much money make possible for you? So there's one thing is the money, and the other thing is what that money can buy.
Well, I bought everything that I could hide. I bought 7 farms. I owned the land where the city of Moreno Valley, California is. I had an option on that land. Did the planning and development of that. The most expensive coin in the world. Yachts, ships, airplanes galore.
Did that bring you happiness?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I think I'm happier now. I know I'm happier now.
So looking back, would you do it the same way all again?
No way.
Really? Even the thrill of it?
Not even the thrill of it. It wasn't worth 33 years in prison being away from my lovely family.
So money. What about the power? Just being on top of the world where nobody can, not the governments, the police, all the big bad agencies chasing you, and you could do whatever the heck you wanted.
As far as having to look over your shoulder everywhere you went and every phone call you made, make sure that you was naked with somebody in the ocean before you talked. It's rather uncomfortable.
Yeah. I like to make phone calls the same way.
Correct.
Again, I apologize for a set of ridiculous questions, but you mentioned cryptocurrencies and money. What is money? Why do we have money? Do you think about this kind of from this high philosophical level at times of this tool, this idea that we humans have all kind of came up with and seem to be using effectively to do stuff?
Money is a social construct, okay, in my opinion. And this has been somehow, people always felt that somehow money is a way to allow us to transact, even though we want different things. Yeah. So I have 2 sheep, and then you have 1 cow. And I want the cow, but you are looking for blankets instead. So to have money, it really simplifies this. But at the end of it, and that's why a bit was invented. And you started with gold, you started with coinage, then you started with check. But at the end of the day, money is essentially a social construct because you know that what you receive, you can actually spend with somebody else. And so there is a kind of a social pact and social belief that you have. At the end of the day, even barter requires these beliefs that other people are going to accept the quote-unquote currency you offer them. Because if I'm a mason and you ask me to build a wall in your field, and I did, and you, in exchange, you give me 1,000 sheep, what am I going to do? Eat them all? No, I have to feed them. And if I don't feed them, they die and my value is 0. So in receiving these livestock, I must believe that somebody else will accept them in return for something else.
Yeah,
so money is this social belief, social shared belief system that makes people transact.
That's fascinating. I didn't even think about that. That you're actually you have a deep network of beliefs about how society operates. So the value is assigned even to sheep based on that. Everyone will continue operating how they were previously operating.
Yeah.
Somebody will feed the sheep. I didn't even think about that. That's fascinating. So that directly transfers to the space of money and then to the space of digital money, cryptocurrency. Okay. Does it bother you sort of intellectually when this money that is a social construct is not directly tied to physical goods like gold, for example?
Not at all, because after all, gold has some industrial value. Nobody denies it. It's a metal. It doesn't oxidate. It has some good things about it. But does this industrial value really represent the value at which it now is traded? No. So gold is another way to express our belief. I give you an ounce of gold, you treat it like, oh, somebody else will want this for doing something else. So it is really this notion of this. Money is a mental construct, is really, and is shared, is a social construct, I really believe. And so some people feel that it's physical, so therefore gold exists. But then, as you know now, countries, more sophisticated countries right now, they print their own money, and you believe that they are not going to exaggerate it with inflation. Not everybody believes it, but I'm saying there is at least they are not going to exaggerate it blatantly, and therefore you receive it because you know that somebody else will accept it, will have faith in the currency, and so on and so forth. But whether it's gold, whether it's livestock, whatever it is, money is really a shared belief.
Good.
So let's ask the high philosophical question is
Sure.
about money.
Yeah.
What at the highest level is money? What is money?
It's a kind of game, and it's a game where we have points, and like if you have points, there's this one move where you can reduce your points by a number and increase someone else's points by the same number, and these.
So it's a fair game, hopefully.
Well, it's one kind of fair game. Like, for example, you can have other kinds of fair games. Like, you could have a game where if I give someone a point and you give someone a point, then instead of that person getting 2 points, that person gets 4 points. And that's also fair. But, money is easy to kind of set up, and it serves a lot of useful functions. And so it kind of just survives in society as a meme for thousands of years.
It's useful for the storage of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
It's useful for the exchange of value.
And it's also useful for denominating future payments. A unit of account.
A unit of account. So what, if you look at the history of money in human civilization, if you're a student of history, like how has its role or just the mechanisms of money changed over time in your view? Even if we just look at the 20th century or before, and then leading up to cryptocurrency. Is that something you think about?
Yeah, and I think like the big thing in the 20th century is kind of we saw a lot more intermediation, I guess. Like, the first part is kind of the move from adding more of different kinds of banking, and then we saw the move from kind of dollars being backed by gold to dollars being backed by gold that's only redeemable by certain people to dollars not being backed by anything, to kind of this system where you have a bunch of free floating currencies, and then people like getting kind of bank accounts, and then those things becoming electronic, people getting accounts with payment processors that have bank accounts. So
what do you make of that? That's such a fascinating philosophical idea that money might not be backed by anything.
Mm-hmm.
What is that like fascinating to you, that money can exist without being backed by something physical?
It definitely is.
Like, what do you make of that? Like, how is that possible? Is that stable? If you look at the future of human civilization, is it possible to have money at the large scale, at such a hugely productive and rich societies, be able to operate successfully without money being backed by anything physical?
I feel like the interesting thing about the 21st century especially is that a lot of the important, valuable things are not backed by anything. Like if you look at like tech companies, for example, like something like Twitter,
yes.
Right? Like you could theoretically imagine that if all of the employees wanted to, they could kind of come together, they would quit, and start working on Twitter 2.0, and then the value of and just kind of build the exact same product, or possibly build a better product, and then just kind of continue on from there. And the original Twitter would kind of just not have people left anymore, right? Like there is theoretically kind of code and like IP that's owned by the company, but in reality, like good programmers could probably rewrite all that stuff in 3 months. So the reason why the thing has value is just kind of network effects and coordination problems, right? Like these employees in reality aren't going to switch all at once, and also the users aren't all going to switch at once, because it's just difficult for them to switch at once. And so there's these kind of metastable of equilibria in interactions between thousands and millions of people that are just actually quite sticky, even though if you try to kind of assume that everyone's a perfectly rational and kind of perfectly slippery spherical cow, they don't seem to exist at all.
That stickiness, do you have a sense, a grasp of the sort of the fundamental dynamic, like the physics of that stickiness? It seems to work, but and I think some of the cryptocurrency ideas kind of rely on it working.
Yeah, it's it's the sort of thing that's definitely been economically modeled a lot. Like one the kind of analogy of something similar that you often see in textbooks as like, what is a government? Like if, for example, like 80% of people in a country just like tomorrow suddenly had the idea that like the laws that are currently the laws in the government that currently is the government are just people, and some other thing is the government, and they just kind of start acting like it, then that would kind of become the new reality. And then the question is, well, what happens if kind of between 0 and 80 people or 80% of people start believing that? And like, what is the thing you see is that if there is one of these kind of switches happening, this kind of revolution, then if you're the first person to join, then like you probably don't have the incentive to do that. But then if you're the 55th percentile person to join, then suddenly it becomes quite safe too. And so it definitely is the sort of thing that you can kind of try to analyze and understand mathematically. But one of the kind of results is that the sort of like when the switch happens definitely can be chaotic sometimes.
Yeah, but still, like to me, the idea that the network effects, the fact that human beings at a scale of like millions, billions, can share, even the idea of currency, like all agree. That's just I know economics can model it. I'm a skeptic on economic, and it's like so my favorite sort of field, maybe recreationally, psychology, is trying to understand human behavior. And I think sometimes people just kind of pretend that they can have a grasp on human behavior, even though it's such a messy space that all the models that psychology or economics, those different perspectives on human behavior can have are difficult. It's difficult to know how much that's wishful thinking and how much it is actually getting to the core of understanding human behavior. But on that idea, what do you think is the role of money in human motivation? So do you think money, from an economics perspective, from a psychology perspective, is core to like human desires?
Money is definitely very far from the only motivator. It is a big motivator, and it's one of the closest things you have to a universal motivator. Because ultimately, in like almost any person in the world, if you ask them to do something, like they'll be more inclined to do it if you also offer them money, right? And that's like, there's definitely many cases where people will do things other than things that maximize how much money they have, and that happens all the time. But like, though a lot of those other things are kind of much more specific to and of who that person is and of what their situation is, the relationship between the motive and the action, and these other things.
What do you think is the interplay of the other motivator from like Nietzsche perspective is power? Do you think money equals power? Do you think those are conflicting ideas? Do you think, I mean, that's one of the ideas that decentralized currency, decentralized applications are looking at is who holds the power?
Yeah. Money is definitely a kind of power. And there's definitely people who want money because it gives them power. And then even if money doesn't seem to kind of explicitly be about money, a lot of things that people spend money on are ultimately about kind of social status of some kind. So I definitely view those two things as kind of interplaying. And then there's also money as just a way of like measuring how successful you are, like as a scoreboard, right? So this kind of gets back to the game. I mean, like if you have $4 billion, then the main benefit you get from going up, well, one of the big benefits you get from going up to $6 billion is that now instead of being below the guy who has 5, you're above the guy who has 5.
So you think money could be kind of, in the game of life, it's also a measure of self-worth. It's like how we
It's definitely
kinda-
how a lot of people perceive it.
define ourselves in
Yeah.
the hierarchy of
And I'm
society.
not saying it's kind of a healthy thing that people define their self-worth as money, because it's definitely kind of far from a perfect indicator of like how much you value you provide to society or anything like this. But I definitely think that like, as a matter of kind of current practice, a bunch of people do feel that way.
So what does utopia from an economic perspective look like to you? What does a perfect world look like?
I guess the Economist's utopia would be one where kind of everything is kind of incentive aligned in the sense that there aren't kind of conflicts between what satisfies your goals and kind of what is good for kind of everyone in the world as a whole.
What do you think that would look like? Does that mean there's still poor people and rich people? There's still income inequality? Do you think sort of Marxist ideas are strong? Do you think sort of ideas of objectivism, like where the market rules, is strong? Like what is there different economic philosophies that just seem to be reflective of what a utopia would be?
So I definitely think that existing economic philosophies do end up kind of systematically kind of deviating from the utopia in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Like, one of the big things I talk about, for example, is public goods, right? And public goods are especially important on the internet, right? Because like the idea is with kind of money as this game where I lose a few coins and you gain the same number of coins. Is that this usually happens in a trade where I lose some money, you gain some money, you lose a sandwich and I gain a sandwich, and this kind of model works really well when the thing that we're using money to incentivize is kind of private goods, right? Things that you provide to one person where the benefit comes to one person. But on the internet especially, but also many, many contexts kind of off the internet, there's actions that kind of individuals or groups can take where instead of the benefit going to one person, the benefit just goes to many people at the same time, and you can't control who the benefit goes to, right? So, for example, this podcast, we publish it, and when it's published, you don't have any fine-grained control over, like, oh, these 38,000 people can watch it, and then, like, these other 29,000 people can't. Yeah. It's like, once the number goes high enough, then, people will just, like, copy it. And then when I write articles on a blog, then they're just, like, free for everyone, and that stuff's even harder to prevent anyone from copying. So, and aside from that, things like, scientific research, for example, and even taking more pedestrian examples like climate change mitigation would be a big one. So there's a lot of things in the world where you have these kind of individual actions with concentrated costs and distributed benefits, and money as a point system does not do a good job of encouraging these things. And one of the kind of other things, even kind of tangentially connected to crypto, but kind of theoretically outside of it that I work on is this sort of mechanism called quadratic funding. And the way to think about it is kind of imagine a point system where if one person gives coins to one other person, then it works the same way as money. But if multiple people give coins to one person, and they do so anonymously, so it's kind of not in consideration for a specific service to that person themselves, then the number of coins received by that person is kind of greater than just the sum of the number of coins that have given by those different people. So the actual formula is you take the square root of the amount that each person gave, then you add all the square roots, and then you kind of square the sum. Yeah, and then you give that. And the idea here would basically be that if, let's say, for example, you just started going off and kind of planting a lot of trees, and there's a bunch of people that are really happy that you're planting trees, and then so they go and all kind of throw a coin your way, then there is basically the fact that kind of you get more than the sum, you get this kind of square of some of these of square roots of these tiny amounts, is that this actually kind of compensates for the tragedy of the commons, right? And there's even this kind of mathematical proof that it sort of optimally compensates for it.
What is the tragedy of the commons?
This is just this idea that if there is this situation where there's some public good that lots of people benefit from, then no individual person wants to contribute to it, because if they contribute, they only get a small part of the benefit from their contribution, but they pay the full cost of their contribution.
In which context is this? Sorry, what is the term quadratic? What?
Quadratic funding is
quadratic
the mechanism.
Funding.
Yeah.
In which context is this mechanism useful? So obviously you said to combat the tragedy of the commons, but in which context do you see it as useful, actually, practically speaking?
Yeah, theoretically, public goods in general, right? So
like services, what are we talking about? What's a public good?
Yeah, so within the Ethereum ecosystem, for example, we've actually tried using this mechanism. I wrote a couple of articles about this kind of on Vitalik.ca, where I go through some of the most recent rounds, and it's been really interesting. Some of the top ones that people supported, there were things like kind of just online user interfaces that make it easier for people to interact with Ethereum. There was documentation, there were podcasts, there were kind of software kind of clients, like kind of implementations of the Ethereum protocol, privacy tools, just like lots of things that are kind of useful to lots of people.
When a lot of people are contributing, funding a particular entity, that's really interesting. Is there something special about the quadratic, the summing of the square roots and the square?
So another way to think about it is imagine if n people each give $1, then the person gets n squared, right? And so each individual person's contribution gets multiplied by n, right? Because you have n people. And so that kind of perfectly compensates for the kind of n to 1 tragedy of the commons.
I just wonder if the squared part is somehow fundamental.
No, it is. And I'd recommend you go to on Vitalik.ca. I have this article called "Quadratic Payments: A Primer." I'd highly recommend it. It's kind of at least my attempt so far, and of explaining the intuition behind this.
What do you make of Elon Musk investing with Tesla, investing in Bitcoin, and maybe broaden it out in some of these other, big billionaires, but also people tied to major companies investing in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think Michael Saylor really led the charge on that. So he's the CEO of MicroStrategy that I think they've acquired upwards of $2 billion in Bitcoin now, started acquiring August, maybe of 2020. And he's, personally bought a lot of it. He bought a lot as a treasury reserve asset for his company, MicroStrategy. Then they leveraged up on a convertible note and bought more. So he's really leading the charge in this Bitcoin institutional adoption.
Yeah, your conversation with him is a really interesting one. Your series of episodes, I suppose, but it's only a couple of conversations. I guess.
Yeah, we recorded twice, 5.5 hours each.
Yeah,
So it's about
nice.
11 hours of content. And yeah, thank you. It's a lot of people have said that it's the best first principle thing they've ever seen on Bitcoin, which I take no credit for that at all. I mean, I just sat down with a guy and unleashed him. He's just a beast.
Yeah. But it's fascinating that his long-term vision with it. I mean, I'm not sure I'm all philosophically bought in, but if he's right, if this set of ideas are as powerful as he describes, as you described, that this would change the world. Which, as you say, it's funny that a company like MicroStrategy might be the company that has the biggest macro effect on our economy, on our world.
Yeah. The conversation reshaped my worldview a lot too, because he framed money as energy, which I had often thought of money as time. And it explored those connections a lot in my writing, but looking at it as energy, and then his supposition that the purpose of life is to basically channel energy across space and time. So we're just trying to figure out how to channel more energy across space and time toward the satisfaction of aims. And his definition, or his answer to that question, what is money, is that money is the highest form of energy a human being can channel. So it's a claim to all other forms of energy we can manifest in the world. And that just completely reshaped how I see it, brought in this whole other side to my intellectual explorations of money.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? So I understand money is time, which is in itself a really powerful idea. But money is energy and channeling energy. Can you break that apart?
Yeah. So I guess definitely have to check out the whole series to really get his perspective, but I'll do my best to condense it. Life itself, all forms of life are, they're dependent on energy, right? Energy fuels everything, fuels life and action and motion and all of that. And we could say that maybe like a plant is harnessing solar energy and then reallocating that into growth. So its aim is to grow towards the sun, right? So it's allocating energy towards its goal of harnessing more solar energy, kind of thing. So, and humans too have evolved to figure out how to harness energy in different ways to satisfy higher and more complicated aims. So the original energy network that he referenced was fire, right? We actually learned to wield fire as a tool in and of itself. So not only are we learning to channel energy, but we actually learn how to isolate energy as a tool in and of itself. And so we went into that, how harnessing fire had changed human beings. And actually, this is one of the earliest examples too of a coevolution between tool and our biology, because when we developed fire, we developed cooking. And cooking is, you can kind of think of it as pre-digestion in a way. We're liberating these macronutrients or making things that otherwise would not be digestible, edible. And it increases the efficiency by which we extract nutrients from food. That's what cooking does. So when we figured out cooking, we liberated all these digestive resources that were reallocated towards higher cognitive development. So there's this evolutionary path between figuring out fire and us becoming smarter, which was interesting. Some other early examples he went into were missiles and hydraulics. So missiles being, we learn to hunt at a distance. We can't bring down a woolly mammoth maybe with spears and up close and personal force, but we could with spears and javelins and slings and whatnot. And then he went into how we've used water to channel hydraulic energy. So we can basically overcome gravity. We can move, there's theories that the pyramids were constructed using, the blocks were moved using hydraulic energy or using water. Clearly we use like cargo ships and whatnot to move things much more efficiently across water than we could the land. So his whole view is how we keep figuring out better ways and more efficient ways to harness energy and channel it. And in that perspective, money has always represented a claim on all other forms of energy. So whatever energy couldn't be channeled towards something useful in the economy historically would go into gold mining. So gold became this residual, this token of the excess energy created by the market economy. And then you could take that token of energy and use it to redeem for any other form of energy or any other products of energy itself. So I guess that's my best approximation of it. And it just really shattered my worldview again, because I'd always thought about it as time. Like, we spend time sacrificing to obtain money that we then redeem for commensurate sacrifices from others, but I'd never considered it purely as energy. And then it also ties back into gold, where there was an energy expenditure necessary to obtain gold. So there's a proof of work associated with obtaining gold that protected its market value, right? So you had to expend, again, if market value of gold's 2,000 an ounce, you had to expend 1,900 an ounce mining. So it kept producers honest in a way.
Okay, maybe to step back at the useful fictions or pragmatic truths. Let me ask the question that you've answered in many ways already, but let's explicitly look at: what is money?
Oh, as you know, that's my favorite question. That is the name of the show I just launched, the What is Money show. Clearly, we could say the Bitcoin rabbit hole is what's led me to explore a lot of these ideas in depth. And I think, as we've demonstrated today, it goes well beyond just the economic sphere when you start to think about things like exchange and morality and time preference and civilization. So I love the question, what is money? I think it is the key to incepting a deeper understanding of the world into people, that if you actually just start to ask this seemingly simple question, it surfaces more and more layers of truth. And I just wrote a piece. I think I have 30 something answers to this question. So
So in some sense, it's actually a more systematic way of asking the question of what is the meaning of life. You know, there's some questions that are almost unanswerable, but in their asking allow you to deeply get closer to truth, deeply understand the nature of our human existence. And the meaning of life is almost like this initial philosophers striving towards that. Mm-hmm. If money is indeed as fundamental as you've described, especially in the context of value being fundamental, then that's a more, let's like, a 21st century way of asking the same question about what is the meaning of life. You mentioned that it's a meta property. Out of the list of many ways to answer that question, how would you help people to think about that?
Yeah, the first most serious answer comes from the School of Austrian Economics, and it defines money as a universal medium of exchange. So this would be any good that is held and used purely for purposes of facilitating exchange. So in the configuration of demand for any particular asset, it's bifurcated between its utility, which is a service that it can render to you in real time, whether it's, if it's water, you're thirsty. That's the utility of water, is that it can quench your thirst. Whereas the marketability would be the expectation of future exchange, that other people would want this asset in the future to trade it for whatever they may have. Money is just going to be the good in any trading economy that has the highest proportion of marketability relative to utility. So today, that would be gold. Gold has utility. It's used in electronics. It's used in dentistry and whatnot. But it's largely used as a store of value across time. And that's what it's been used for 5,000 years. So if we say gold has a $10 trillion market cap, maybe 2 trillion of that is its utility value, or it's actually demand for use in computers and dentistry. And then 8 trillion of that is demand for its use as a store of value. Money, the marketability aspects of money boils down to 5 services that money can render. Money needs to be divisible, it needs to be durable, it needs to be recognizable, it needs to be portable, and it needs to be scarce. So I'll gloss over a lot of history with this and just say that historically, money's always been a technology, still is a technology or a tool. I use these terms interchangeably, and you think of a technology as just a more sophisticated tool, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
To best satisfy those properties, monetary metals were determined to be the most satisfactory tool, the most divisible, most durable, most recognizable, most portable tool in the marketplace. Of the monetary metals, gold was the most scarce, as quantified by either its stock to flow ratio or its inflation resistance. So, simple way to say this is that people always prefer the money most resistant to inflation.
That's a nice definition of scarcity in the context of money. Is if you were to measure it, the resistance to inflation. So how hard is it to artificially increase the supply?
That's
supply
right.
of the thing.
That is the hardness of money, and that's why gold is hard money.
Because alchemy is hard.
That's right. Because no one cracked alchemy, so gold became money.
So, I mean, that's such a nice, clean explanation of what is money, with the 5 elements, and gold ultimately won out because of the last piece of scarcity.
That's right. And to get to maybe dig a little deeper there. So scarcity, we commonly think of scarcity as strictly a supply property, where if there's not much of something, then it's scarce. But it's not actually true. Scarcity occurs when demand exceeds supply. So when there's more demand than the supply can justify, the thing becomes an economic good, and it establishes itself a market price. So there's more demand for the thing than the supply can satisfy. The unique thing about money, as a concept at least, is that demand always exceeds supply. Mm-hmm. There's never enough money to satisfy everyone, right? Because another definition for money, it's the most marketable good. So it can be traded for any other good, service, piece of knowledge in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So humans being what we are, we're never satisfied, right? We always want more of something, whatever it may be. So money as the ultimate token of obtaining that something is always scarce as a concept. But the problem with money is that if you can, as you alluded to, easily increase its supply, then all of a sudden you can compromise the scarcity of it over time, and you can rob people through inflation. Mm-hmm. So that's why the market settled on gold as money.
And robbing is reallocating the value so essentially the one property, like why scarcity is important is it adds a lot more friction to the reallocation, like through essentially violence or implied violence.
Well, it prevents it through cost of extraction too. So if you want to go out and dilute gold holders today, you have to go out into the world and mine gold. It's a very expensive process. That process tends to find equilibrium where production cost equals the market value of gold. So if market value is $2,000 an ounce today of gold, its production cost is going to be around there. That's the natural market equilibrium. So that way, gold miners cannot just dilute people over time. Whereas if you look at something like fiat currency, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but its production cost is zero. So there's a reason the market value of fiat currency historically has always converged to zero, because its production cost is near zero. So the extension to that question might be, how did we get from gold to paper currency? And again, this is rooted in the properties of money. As good as monetary metals were, and as good as gold is as money at holding value across time, it's rather limited in terms of portability. It is not as useful for moving value across space. This is another definition of money, by the way, a social device for moving value across space and time. Mm-hmm. So to rectify this technological shortcoming of gold, we introduced, first of all, the custody of gold was gradually centralized into fewer and fewer warehousing operations. This is because there are economies of scale associated with using gold as money, and that if you centralize the custody, the warehouse owner can then issue a paper receipt called a warehouse receipt for that gold, and then market participants can trade that paper as if it's good as gold, and everyone has an option at any time to go and redeem real gold from the warehouse. So that system works until the problem with it is that it introduces the need to trust the custodian. So it's introducing counterparty risk in the form of the custodian. And now, should that warehouse choose to increase the supply of paper notes to gold beyond its supply, so if it's got 3 tons of gold and it issues 6 tons worth of paper receipts, all of a sudden it's participating in a fraud. It's basically lying. It's representing that it has more gold than it actually does. And that is the pathway that we got into banking and central banking, is we needed a convenience mechanism to rectify the portability shortcomings of gold. We needed to be able to move value across space, right? Gold was doing a great job at moving value over time, but not space. Paper currency gave us the ability to move value across space, but it introduced this attack vector for warehouse operators, which became banks, which became central banks, to modify the supply to suit their own political agendas.
Added the snooze button. That allows you to do a little fraud.
To get something
first.
for nothing.
Something, just a little bit at first.
Yeah.
Just this one morning, just a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you can speak to the birth of fiat currency. Is there some interesting characteristics to those early steps that created it? Like, could it have been averted, or is this the natural progression of governments?
You know what's funny is that central banking was initially designed to be the custodian of gold, right? So they were going to custody the gold, issue paper on top of it, and then they would maintain, you could trust the public stamp effectively. You could trust that the central bank had as much gold on reserve as they said they had, and they were supposed to be the trustworthy institution. So we went from placing our trust in a free market game theoretic process where we're trusting gold, and we began trusting this institution instead. That institution would not have arisen if the portability of gold was really high. If we could have somehow sent gold across a telecommunications channel, there would have been no need for a central bank. Everyone could have custodied their gold in any information-bearing medium, frankly, and they could beam it around the world at any time. So this whole institution itself is rooted in a technological shortcoming of gold. So I think it's another way to think about that is maybe had there been all the gold in the world today fills 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. All the gold mined throughout all of human history. So there's not a lot, right?
Wow. Mm-hmm.
What if there had been just like way more? There'd just been, 20,000 Olympic swimming pools worth. Portability wouldn't have been as much of an issue, right? We could have, and this is to say, assuming gold was still the most scarce metal and all these things, portability would have been less of an issue. We would have had less dependence or need for a central bank. So I think it's kind of idiosyncratic in that we just happened to end up here on this planet with a certain amount of gold. It best satisfied the properties of money.
And a certain amount of humans geographically dispersed, such that portability had certain properties that you want to achieve for humans in the geographical space to be able to be a exchange value.
It became more of an issue as we globalized, right? As we became more of a global society, we needed money that could move across space really fast, right? So we could trade in international capital markets. So that drove the central bank to become the dominant institution of the world. And if you follow the flows of gold throughout history, I've been watching this documentary on World War I and World War II on Netflix. I think it's called World War II in Color.
Oh, yeah. This is really good.
It's so good. And when I say gold has been the governor of governments, or gold is geopolitical money, like it is the base layer operating system, has been the base layer operating system for analog society. Mm-hmm. So it's always been about who controls the gold. Is who makes the rules. And that's, in that context, is why Bitcoin is so interesting, because it is the disruptor to this base level operating system that's functioned for all of human history.
In the book Ascent of Money, you give a history of the world through the lens of money. If the financial system is evolutionary in nature, much like life on Earth. What is the origin of money on Earth?
The origin of money predates coins. Most people kind of assume I'll talk about coins, but coins are relatively late developments. Back in ancient Mesopotamia, so I don't know, 5,000 years ago, there were relations between creditors and debtors. There are even in the simplest economy, because of the way in which agriculture works. Hey, I need to plant these seeds, but I'm not going to have crops for X months. So we have clay tablets in which simple debt transactions are inscribed. I remember looking at great numbers of these in the British Museum when I was writing The Ascent of Money. And that's really the beginning of money. The minute you start recording a relationship between a creditor and a debtor, you have something that is quasi-money. And that is probably what these clay tablets mostly denoted. From that point on, there's a great evolutionary experiment to see what the most convenient way is to record relations between creditors and debtors. And what emerges in the time of the ancient Greeks are coins, metal, tokens, sometimes of valuable metal, sometimes not, usually bearing the imprint of a state or a monarch. And that's the sort of more familiar form of money that we still use today for very, very small transactions. I expect coins will all be gone by the time my youngest son is my age, but they're a last remnant of a very, very old way of doing simple transactions.
By the way, when you say coins, you mean physical coins.
I'm
Because
talking
the term
about
coins has been rebranded into the digital space.
yeah, not
as well.
coin-based coins, actual coins. You know, the ones that jangle in your pocket and you kind of don't know quite what to do with once you have some. So that became an incredibly pervasive form of paying for things. Money's just a crystallization of a relationship between a debtor and a creditor, and coins are just very fungible. Whereas a clay tablet relates to a specific transaction, coins are generic and fungible. They can be used in any transaction. So that was an important evolutionary advance. If you think of financial history, and this was the point of The Ascent of Money, as an evolutionary story, there are punctuated equilibria. People get by with coins for a long time, despite their defects as a means of payment, such as that they can be debased, they can be clipped. It's very hard to avoid fake or debased money entering the system. But coinage is still kind of the basis of payments all the way through the Roman Empire, out the other end into the so-called Dark Ages. It's still how most things are settled in cash transactions in the early 1300s. You don't get a big shift until after the Black Death, when there's such a need to monetize the economy because of chronic labor shortages and feudalism begins to unravel, that you just don't have a sufficient amount of coinage. And so you get bills of exchange. And I'm really into bills of exchange because, and this I hope will capture your listeners' and viewers' imaginations, when they start using bills of exchange, which are really just pieces of paper saying, I owe you over a 3-month period while goods are in transit from Florence to London, you get the first peer-to-peer payment system, which is network verified, because they're not coins. They don't have a king's head on them. They're just pieces of paper. And the verification comes in the form of signatures. And you need ultimately some kind of guarantee. If I write an IOU to you, bill of exchange, I mean, you don't really know me that well. We only just met. So you might want to get it endorsed by, I don't know, somebody really creditworthy like Elon. And so we actually can see in the late 14th century in northern Italy and in England and elsewhere, the evolution of a peer-to-peer network system of payment. And that's actually how world trade grows, because you just couldn't settle long oceanic transactions with coinage. It just wasn't practical. All those treasure chests full of doubloons, which were part of the way in which the Spanish Empire worked, were really inefficient. So bills of exchange are an exciting part of the story, and they illustrate something I should have made more clear in The Ascent of Money, that not everything used in payment needs to be money. Classically, economists will tell you, money has three different functions. You've heard this a zillion times, right? It's a unit of account, it's a store of value, and it's a medium of exchange. Now, there are 3 or 4 things that are worth saying about this, and I'll just say 2. 1, it may be that those 3 things are a trilemma, and it's very difficult for anything to be all of them. This point was made by my Hoover colleague Manny Rincon-Cruz last year, and I still wish he would write this up as a paper because it's a great insight. The second thing that's really interesting to me is that payments don't need to be money. And if we go around, as economists love to do, saying, well, Bitcoin's not money because it doesn't fulfill these criteria, we're missing the point that you could build a system of payments, which I think is how we should think about crypto, that isn't money, doesn't need to be money. It's like bills of exchange. It's network-based verification, peer-to-peer transactions without third-party verification. When it hit me the other day that we actually had this precedent for crypto, I got quite excited and thought, I wish I had written that in The Ascent of Money.
Can you sort of, from a first principles, like almost like a physics perspective, or maybe a human perspective, describe where does the value of money come from? Like, where is it? So it's a sheet of paper or it's coins, but it feels like in a platonic sense, there's some kind of thing that's actually storing the value, as us a bunch of ants are dancing around and so on.
I come from a family of physicists. I'm the black sheep of the family. My mother's a physicist, my sister is. And so when you ask me to explain something in physics terms, I get a kind of little part of me dies because I know I'll fail. But in truth, it doesn't really matter what we decide money is going to be. And anything can record, crystallize the relationship between the creditor and the debtor. It can be a piece of paper, it can be a piece of metal, it can be nothing, it can just be a digital entry. It's trust that we're really talking about here. We are not just trusting one another, we may not, but we are trusting the money. So whatever we use to represent the creditor-debtor relationship, whether it's a banknote or a coin or whatever, it does depend on us both trusting it. And that doesn't always pertain. What we see in episodes of inflation, especially episodes of hyperinflation, is a crisis of trust, a crisis of confidence in the means of payment. And this is very traumatic for the societies to which it happens. By and large, human beings, particularly once you have a rule of law system of the sort that evolved in the West and then became generalized, are predisposed to trust one another, and the default setting is to trust money. Even when it depreciates at a quite steady rate, as the US dollar has done pretty much uninterruptedly since the 1960s, it takes quite a big disruption for money to lose that trust. But I think essentially what money should be thought of as is a series of tokens that can take any form we like and can be purely digital, which represent our transactions as creditors and debtors. And the whole thing depends on our collective trust to work. I had to explain this to Stephen Colbert once on the Colbert Show, the old show that was actually funny. And it was a great moment when he said, so Neil, could I be money? And I said, yes, we could settle a debt with a human being. That was quite common in much of history, but it's not the most convenient form of money. Money has to be convenient. That's why when they worked out how to make payments with cell phones, the Chinese simply went straight there from bank accounts. They skipped out credit cards. You won't see credit cards in China except in the hands of naive tourists.
So again, maybe another dumb question, but
there are no such things as dumb questions today.
There you go. But what is money? So you've mentioned, credit and money. It another thing that if I just zoom out from an alien perspective and look at human civilization, it's incredible that we've created a thing that only works because we all agree it has value. So I guess my question is, how do you think about money as this emergent phenomenon, and what do you think is the future of money? You've commented on Bitcoin, other forms. What do you think is its history and future? How do you think about money?
There are two things that money is for. It's a medium of exchange, and it's a storehold of wealth.
Yes.
So money, so you could say something's a medium of exchange, and then you could say, is it a storehold of wealth? Okay. So and money is that vehicle that is those things and can be used to pay off your debt. So when you have a debt and you provide it, it pays off your debt. So that's that process.
And it's, I apologize to interrupt, but it only can be a medium of exchange or a store of wealth when everybody recognizes it to be of value.
That's right.
Right.
And so you see in the history and around the world, and you go to places. I was in an island in the Pacific in which they had as money these big stones, and literally they were taking a boat, this big carved stone, and they were taking it from one of the islands to the other, and it sank. The piece of this big stone piece of money that they had, and it went to the bottom, and they still perceived it as having value, so that it was, even though it was in the bottom and it's this big hunk of rock, the fact that somebody owned it, they would say, oh, I'll own it for this and that. I've seen beads in different places, shells converted to this and mediums of exchange. And when we look at what we've got, you're exactly right. It is the notion that if I give it to you, I can then take it and I can buy something with it. And so it's a matter of perception. Okay. And then we go through then the history of money and the vulnerabilities of money. And what we have is through history, there's been two types of money. Those that are claims on something of value, like the connection to gold or something.
That's right.
That would be, or they just are money without any connection. And then we have a system now, which is a fiat monetary system. So that's what money is. Then it will last as long as it's kept of value, and it works that way. So let's say central banks, when they get in the position of like they owe a lot of money, like we have in the case, it's increasingly the case, and they also are a bind, and they have the printing press to print the money and get out of that, and you have a lot of people might be in that position, then you can print it, and then it could be devalued in there. And so history has shown, forget about today, history has shown that no currency every currency has either ended as being a currency, or devalued as a currency over periods of time, long periods of time. So it evolves and it changes, but everybody needs that medium of exchange, and everybody needs that storehold of wealth. So it keeps changing what is money over a period of time.
But you're, if I may say so, one of the richest people in the world. So you're a good person to ask, does money buy happiness?
No, it's been shown that once you get over a basic level of income so that you can take care of the pain, you can health and whatever, there's no correlation between the level of happiness that one has and the level of money that one has. That thing that has the highest correlation is quality relationships with others, community. If you look at surveys of these things across all surveys and all societies, it's a sense of community and interpersonal relationships. That is not in any way correlated with money. You can go down to native tribes in, very poor places, or you can go in all different communities. And so they have the opportunity to have that. I'm very lucky in that I started with nothing, so I had the full range. I can tell you, by not having money, but and then having quite a lot of money, and I did that in the right order. Okay.
So you started from nothing in Long Island.
Yeah, and my dad was a jazz musician, but I had all really that I needed because I had two parents who loved me and took good care of me, and I went to a public school that was a good public school, and basically, that you don't need much more than that in order to. That's the equal opportunity part. Anyway, what I'm saying is, no, I experienced the range. And there are many studies on the answer to your question. No, money does not bring happiness. Money gives you an ability to make choices.
Does it get in the way, in any way, of forming those deep, meaningful relationships?
It can. There are lots of ways that it makes negative. That's one of them. It could stand in the way of that. Yes. Okay. But I could almost list the ways that it could be a problem.
Yeah. What does it buy? So if you can elaborate, you mentioned a bit of freedom.
At the most fundamental level, it doesn't take a whole lot, but it takes enough that you can take care of yourself and your family to be able to learn, do the basics of have the relationships, have health care, the basics of those types of things. You can cover the patients. And then to have maybe enough security, but maybe not too much security.
That's right.
That you essentially are okay. Okay, that's really good.
Yeah.
And that's what money will get you.
And everything else could go either way. There's
there's more.
There's more.
Okay. Then beyond that, what it then starts to do, that's the most important thing.
Yes.
But beyond that, what it starts to do is to help to make your dreams happen in various ways. Okay. So, for example, now like in my case, those dreams might not be just my own dreams; their impact on others' dreams. Okay. So my own dreams might be, I don't know, I can pass along these, at my stage in life, I can pass along these principles to you and I can give those things, or I can do whatever. I can go on an adventure. I can start a business. I can do those other things, be productive. I can self-actualize in ways that might be not possible otherwise. So that's my own belief. And then and I can also help others. I mean, this is, to the extent when you get older and with time and whatever, you start to feel connected, spirituality, that's what I'm referring to. You can start to have an effect on others that's beneficial and so on. Gives you the ability. I could tell you that people who are very wealthy who have that feel that they don't have enough money. Bill Gates will feel almost broke, because relative to the things he'd like to accomplish through the Gates Foundation and things like that, oh my God, he doesn't have enough money to accomplish the things he wishes for. But those things are not, they're not the most fundamental things. So I think that people sometimes think money has value. Money doesn't have value. Money is, like you say, just a medium of exchange at a store held a well. And so what you have to say is, what is it that you're going to buy? Now, there are other people who get their gratification in ways that are different from me, but I think in many cases, let's say somebody who used money to have a status symbol, what would I say? Or that's probably unhealthy. But then, I don't know, somebody who says, I love a great, gorgeous painting. And it's going to cost lots of money. In my priorities, I can't get there. Yeah. But that doesn't mean who am I to judge others in terms of, let's say, their element of the freedom to do those things. So it's a little bit complicated. But by and large, that's my view on money.
By the way, in terms of money, I'll never have a villa. Yeah. No, I will always give away everything I own.
Don't do that.
No, invest into like things like you mentioned, awesome things.
Yeah, invest, fine, but a little bit of avuncular advice.
Mhm.
Don't pledge to be the person who disgorges themselves of security. Money is freedom. That's what it is. It's a big honking pile of freedom. Okay. You can choose to use it as the freedom to imprison you if you don't, so you can use it as freedom to make yourself a prisoner of your money. But generally speaking, Lex, money is freedom and your voice is important. At least retain the amount of money, security you need to follow Joe's advice. What is the point of FU money if you don't say FU? The number of people who have FU money who don't say FU indicates the number of people who chose the freedom of their wealth to create a prison. Yeah. They built a prison with the freedom they had and they walked into it, locked the door.
I think it's too difficult not to create. The reason I want to give away the money is because I just know my own psychology, and you create prisons. Our human mind just creates those prisons. The FU money is enough for basic shelter and basic food. That's the optimal FU.
You don't have kids yet.
This is the problem. This is why so this is me, single Lex, speaking.
Great.
But
future Lex, I'm talking to future Lex. Single present Lex, please don't listen. Yeah. Don't be an ass. Okay. You're going to need some money, and don't make these pledges to say on a podcast. I want to save you from yourself. You need money to do many of the beautiful things that we're counting on you to do. Don't F it up.
I mean, I think the cryptocurrency thing is an interesting approach to reducing the error in the database that is called money. I think I have a pretty deep understanding of what money actually is on a practical day-to-day basis because of PayPal. We really got in deep there. And right now, the money system, actually, for practical purposes, is really a bunch of heterogeneous mainframes running old COBOL.
Okay, you mean literally? That's
literally
that is literally what's happening
in batch mode. Okay,
in batch mode.
Yeah, and I pity the poor bastards who have to maintain that code. Okay, that's a pain. That's pain.
Not even Fortran. It's COBOL. Yep,
it's COBOL. And the banks are still buying mainframes in 2021 and running ancient COBOL code. The Federal Reserve is like probably even older than what the banks have, and they have an old COBOL mainframe. And so now, the government effectively has editing privileges on the money database, and they use those editing privileges to make more money whenever they want, and this increases the error in the database that is money. So I think money should really be viewed through the lens of information theory, and so it's kind of like an internet connection. Like, what's the bandwidth? Total bit rate. What is the latency, jitter, packet drop? Errors in the network communication. Just think of money like that, basically. I think that's probably the right way to think of it, and then say what system, from an information theory standpoint, allows an economy to function the best. Crypto is an attempt to reduce the error in money that is contributed by governments diluting the money supply as basically a pernicious form of taxation.
So both policy in terms of with inflation and actual like technological cobalt, like cryptocurrency takes us into the 21st century in terms of the actual systems that allow you to do the transaction, to store wealth, all those kinds of things.
Like I said, just think of money as information. People often will think of money as having power in and of itself. It does not. Money is information, and it does not have power in and of itself. Again, applying the physics tools of thinking about things in the limit is helpful. If you are stranded on a tropical island, and you have $1 trillion, it's useless because there's no resource allocation. Money is a database for resource allocation, but there's no resources to allocate except yourself. So money is useless. If you're stranded on a desert island with no food, all the Bitcoin in the world will not stop you from starving.
Yeah.
So, just think of money as a database for resource allocation across time and space, and then what system it is, in what form should that database or data system, what would be most effective? Now, there is a fundamental issue with say Bitcoin in its current form, in that the transaction volume is very limited, and the latency the latency for a properly confirmed transaction is too long, much longer than you'd like. So it's actually not great from a transaction volume standpoint or a latency standpoint. So it is perhaps useful as to solve an aspect of the money database problem, which is this sort of store of wealth or an accounting of relative obligations, I suppose. But it is not useful as a currency, as a day-to-day currency.
But people have proposed different technological solutions,
like Lightning.
Lightning Network and the layer 2 technologies on top of that. I mean, it seems to be all kind of a trade-off, but the point is, it's kind of brilliant to say that just think about information, think about what kind of database, what kind of infrastructure enables that exchange
just say
of
like you're
information.
operating an economy, and you need to have something that allows for the to have efficient value ratios between products and services. So you've got this massive number of products and services, and you need to, you can't just barter. It's like, that would be extremely unwieldy. So you need something that gives you a ratio of exchange between goods and services. And then something that allows you to shift obligations across time, like debt and equity, shift obligations across time. Then what does the best job of that?
Is involved.
Let's talk about Bitcoin first, and then it'll
Yes.
help us use as a kind of a comparison to Ethereum or whatever else. So when you think about what is money, right? That's kind of the first question people really kind of go down the rabbit hole on. And ultimately today, it's a belief system. Right. And you may believe that one currency has more value over another because it's backed by a certain military, or a certain government has a monetary policy that you believe in or don't believe in. But ultimately, it's a belief system. There's nothing backing this other than a government asks you to pay your taxes in it. Right. And they can have a monopoly on violence in terms of they can put you in jail if you don't pay your taxes. They can go to other countries and they can invade and do all this stuff. It wasn't always like that. Right. It was historically a layer 1 technology was gold. And so gold was a fantastic store of value. You knew that if you held gold, it wasn't going to be inflated away. It was sound money. It was outside the system and no one could create more of it. And the reason why that's important is because that optimization for store of value served as the bedrock of the entire stack of money for 5,000 years. And so the problem with that, though, again, trade-off between store of value is it was really hard to transact with. Right. If I came in here and you said, hey, I want a couple of ounces of gold, and I had a whole bar, I'd have to literally shave off the ounces of gold. Mm-hmm. It's heavy to carry around. If you said to me, hey, you're in one city, mail it to me, it's really expensive. There's all these issues with it. And so ultimately what people said was, well, let's create a second layer on top of that gold in order to make it easier to transact. And so we created paper claims on the gold. So, hey, don't carry around the gold in your pocket anymore. Put it in a vault or a bank. They're going to issue a paper claim. Now you and I can trade these paper claims around. And at any point, if you want the gold, you just show up and you say, hey, give me 3 ounces of gold or 2 bars or whatever. And so that actually made the store of value. It allowed that to be the anchor and kind of the most important part, the security of your purchasing power. But now it became easier to transact. And then eventually we built layers even on top of that. So everything from electronic money, kind of electronic QSIPs, all the way to credit and other systems on top of that gold. 1971 comes around, and obviously we depeg from that gold, right? And it was a temporary measure at the time. We ended up not going back to it. And so what you moved or transitioned from was sound money, which was outside the system. No one could create more. To now the government had full control. They could create as much as they wanted to. They tried to be responsible and disciplined, but obviously hard to do. Sometimes we've been really good at it. Sometimes we've been less good at it. And then you go around the world, and some countries have absolutely sucked at it, and some have been good at it.
Yourselves.
I think they're actually more interconnected than you're giving it credit for, right? Which is, what is money? Money is time, ultimately, right? The pursuit of the acquisition of money, right? Of whether it's a currency or true money, is because that should give you more time. Mm. And so one of my favorite movies ever is, and it's funny because Justin Timberlake is in it, is this movie In Time.
You lost me.
I lose most people at that part.
Okay. In Time?
In Time. And basically the premise of the movie is that everyone has a clock that's embedded into their arm. And so if you go to work, you basically put your arm underneath when you leave, and there's time that's deposited into your clock. And if your clock ever hits all zeros, you're dead. Mm-hmm. You die on the spot. And so there's a number of scenes where people are basically running, to get to you, and I give you a little bit more time so that you can get to work on Monday, and then you work to acquire time. And so basically time becomes this currency. But what becomes very fascinating about it is there are sections in society where literally there's physical places. If you only have, let's say, 72 hours or less, you're allowed to go to section 1. Section 5, though, is because you have years and years and years on your clock. And in this movie, everyone at the age of 25 freezes from a biological aging standpoint. Mm-hmm. So everyone stays the same, but you may have lived for 1,000 years. And so what becomes so fascinating about it is that rich people have time, poor people do not have time. And so in it, Justin Timberlake, the main character, at one point essentially acquires a bunch of time. And he's able to go to one of the higher levels, and now he's attending all of these galas and poker nights and all this stuff. And one of the first things that he learns is that in the lower end of society, everyone is running everywhere at all times in the movie, because time is so finite and it is so scarce. And so therefore, why would I walk down the street? I must run down the street. In the highest level of society, no one runs anywhere. And in fact, if you run, you are seen as lower class. Yeah. Because wealth is time. And so that movie is, it's got a ton of kind of things that you can pull out of it, but to me is the perfect epitome of money is time. And so when you start to think about the acquisition of money, right, it goes to this whole idea of time billionaire. And I know that there's probably a lot of people who have heard about this already, but if you think of 1 million seconds, it's about 11 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. And so if I said to somebody, you have to switch lives with Warren Buffett, would you do it? Some people would say, sure. That'd be their initial reaction. I said, but you have to be, 92 years old. Is the money worth the lack of time? Most people would say no, right? And there's this guy, Graham Duncan, who really articulated this well. And ultimately what ends up happening is you realize time is more valuable than the money. But you acquire the money to gain more time.
And the reason it's valuable is because of the scarcity of time. We currently have the biology, the physics means that this is not just a narrative we tell ourselves. Maybe it is. I don't know. But it feels like pretty sure we're mortal. And in that sense, the scarcity there gives value to time. It's fascinating to think about all the thought experiments here of if that could actually be on the economy, if you can actually convert time in a frictionless way to money.
Well, and if you start to pull on this a little bit and say, okay, a young person today, let's say somebody in their 20s, has about 2 billion seconds left in their life, right? Kind of 60 years, give or take, based on life expectancy. They usually, until they start to understand this concept, think of wealth in dollar terms. But dollars are being devalued. And so, $1 million doesn't get you what it used to get, right? It's kind of an old adage. And so what you're doing is you're pursuing something that ends up losing value. And so it's the constant rat race. It's how do I constantly try to get more? How do I get more dollars? How do I get more dollars? Because even if I say to myself, I'm going to retire when I get $100,000. When I get the $100,000, the $100,000 5 years from now doesn't buy me what I thought it did. So now I need 500,000 or 200,000 or a million or whatever the number is. And so ultimately what ends up occurring is that the Bitcoin community and many people in kind of this idea of sound money is you want to be able to acquire an asset that not only will hold the value, right, the store of value over time, but it will actually appreciate over time. And so when you look at something like Bitcoin against the dollar, against other types of assets, all of these assets are down compared to Bitcoin, right? Now, some of that's just in the early days of kind of the pricing of an asset. You go from very small to something much larger. But now what you start to look at is, well, if you have a finite supply of something, what ends up happening is people begin to value it more. And so in a world where dollars are infinite and other fiat currencies are infinite, Bitcoin becomes very, very interesting, very special, and something that is very aspirational. And so I think that's where you're starting to see people say, wait a second, this is something where that finite, secure store of value is essential to wealth generation and preservation over a long period of time.
And if Sam Harris is right that free will is an illusion, this is really interesting to think about. Maybe time is a kind of blockchain because you can't change anything. And then the physical space-time of the universe is a ledger. So maybe it won't be Bitcoin that replaces gold. Maybe it'll be time. Once we crack open that, in fact, the universe is fully deterministic. So maybe that's what like Eric Weinstein is afraid of. Once you figure out the theories of everything, of physics, we'll be able to then start trading, create a market out of like the very fabric of reality. And that way break it.
Well, if you look at infinite inflationary type currencies, you can't do that, right? Because it constantly is losing value.
Right.
When you look at a finite asset, again, that has the provability of the actual finite element to it, ultimately the wealth is that marketplace.
Yeah.
And so, I always kind of try to highlight for people, the top 55% of Americans understand something that the bottom 45% don't. They invest, right? The bottom 45% consume, the top 55% invest. And that's why we have a wealth inequality gap. And it continues to get wider and wider and wider, is because the people who are holding the devaluing assets and saving are watching their wealth be devalued away. And there's arguments and controversy over how fast that's happening, but it's happening. The people who are holding the assets that have any level of scarcity, right? Real estate may not be finite, but it's scarce, right? Art may not be finite, but it's scarce. Gold may not be finite, but it's scarce. Those assets continue to appreciate against the devaluing currency. And so when you then say, no, I have complete finite supply with provability and this transparency around it where everyone knows how much is there and where it's going. Now, all of a sudden, you and I can transact back and forth that value, and it is a representation of time. Because what I can essentially do is if I gather or acquire more of that wealth, I then can apply leverage to my life.
Mm-hmm.
I can use machines, humans, or some other resources, and basically now free up my time.
Yeah, and it's a fundamental way you are trading time. Maybe it's a little bit indirect, but maybe not. It's fascinating to ask you because this reformulation of money essentially buying time. And, there's the old question of does money buy happiness? So do you think money can buy happiness in the context of money being able to buy time? Or is happiness something else that is beyond all of this?
When people talk about this question, I think that they really focus on money as a means to getting materialistic things. So they want a big house, they want a boat, they want a fast car, they want, whatever. They think that's the stuff that will make them happy. What I think about it is if you have resources, you can have time. And if you have time and you spend it the way that you want to spend it, then that's ultimately happiness. So I always say to people, if you think that money doesn't buy you happiness, what if I told you that if you had more money, you could spend more time with your family? It reframes it.
Yeah.
And now is all about, I want to do certain things in life, but there's a lot of people who spend their life not doing those things because they feel the need to pursue economic means as a way to provide a living or whatever. And so I explain to them, I say, listen, in my opinion, again, it's my opinion, it's what makes me happy. If I can leverage financial resources to create more time to do the things I like, I'm happier. Might not work for everybody, but like that's what works for me. And so there's this element of like, I don't care what other people think if they like that or not, because they're not me, right? Like there's almost this element of like, you got to figure out what works for you. And if it works for me, then like,
No,
sorry.
I think that will resonate with a lot of people. I think that's a brilliant reframing. Is there, by way of advice, was funding in your own journey helpful, unhelpful? Like, is there a right time to get
You
funding?
mean venture funding?
Venture funding, or anything, borrow some money from your parents. I don't know.
Yeah,
But any, like, is money get in the way? Does it help? Is the timing important? Is there some kind of wisdom you can give there? Because you were exceptionally successful very quickly.
Funding helps as long as it's from the right people. That includes yourself. And I'll talk about myself funding myself in a second, which is like, because I can fund myself doing whatever projects I can do, I don't really have another person putting pressure on me except for myself. And that creates strange dynamics, right? But let's like talk about people getting funding from a venture capitalist initially. We raised money from Matt Kohler at Benchmark. He's brilliant, amazing guy, very thoughtful. And he was very helpful early on. But I have stories from entrepreneurs where they raised money from the wrong person or the wrong firm, where incentives weren't aligned. They didn't think in the same way. And bad things happened because of that. The boardroom was always noisy. There were fights. Like, we just never had that. Matt was great. I think like capital these days is kind of a dime a dozen, right? Like, as long as you're fundable, like it seems like there's money out there is what I'm hearing. It's really important that you are aligned and that you think of raising money as hiring someone for your team rather than taking money, if capital is plentiful, right? It provides a certain amount of pressure to do the right thing that I think is healthy for any startup. And it keeps you real and honest because they don't want to lose their money. They're paid to not lose their money. The problem, maybe I could depersonalize it, but like, I remember having lunch with Elon. It's only happened once. And I asked him, I was trying to figure out what I was doing after Instagram, right? Yeah. And I asked him something about like angel investing. And he looked at me with a straight face and was like, why the F would I do that? Like, why? Like, I was like, well, I don't know. Like, you're connected. Like, seems like, he's like, I only invest in myself. And I was like, ooh, okay. Like, not the confidence. I was just like, what a novel idea. It's like, yeah, if you have money, like, why not just put it against your bag and like, enable you visiting Mars or something, right? Like, that's awesome. Great. But I had never really thought of it that way. But also with that comes an interesting dynamic where you don't actually have people who are going to lose that money telling you, hey, don't do this, or hey, you need to face this reality. So you need to create other versions of that truth teller. Mm-hmm. And I whatever I do next, that's going to be one of the interesting challenges, is how do you create that truth-telling situation? And that's part of why, by the way, I think someone like Jack, when you start Square, you have money, but you bring on partners because I think it creates a truth-telling type environment. I'm still trying to figure this out. It's an interesting dynamic.
So you're thinking of perhaps launching some kind of venture where you're investing in yourself?
I mean,
is that in the books potentially?
I'm 37, going on 38 next month. I have a long life to live. I'm definitely not going to sit on the beach, right? So I'm going to do something at some point, and I got to imagine I will like help fund it, right? So the other way of thinking about this is you could park your money in the S&P, and this is bad because the S&P has done wonderfully well the last year, right? Or you can invest in yourself, and if you're not going to invest in yourself, you probably shouldn't do a startup. It's kind of the way of thinking about it.
And you can invest in yourself in the way Elon does, which is basically go all in on this investment. Maybe that's one way to achieve accountability. Is like you're kind of screwed if you fail.
Man, yeah, yeah.
I personally like that. I like burning bridges behind me so that I'm fucked if it fails.
Yeah. It's really important though. One of the things I think Mark said to me early on that sticks with me that I think is true. We were talking about people who had left like operating roles and started doing venture or something. And he was like, a lot of people convince themselves they work really hard. Like they think they work really hard and they put on the show and in their minds they work really hard, but they don't work very hard. There is something about lighting a fire underneath you and burning bridges such that you can't turn back.
Yeah.
That I think, we didn't talk about this specifically, but I think you're right. You need to have that because there's this self-delusion at a certain scale. Oh, I have so many board calls. Oh, like we have all these things to figure out. It's like, this is one of the hard parts about it being an operator. It's like, there are so many people that have made a lot of money not operating, but operating is just one of the hardest things on earth. It is just so effing hard. It is stressful. You are dealing with real humans. You're not just like throwing capital in and hoping it grows. I'm not undermining the VC mindset. I think it's a wonderful thing and needed and so many wonderful VCs I've worked with. But yeah, like when your ass is on the line and it's your money, talk to me in 10 years. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, but like you were saying, that is a source. When you wake up in the morning and you look forward to the day full of challenges, that's also where you can find happiness. Let me ask you about love and friendship.
Sure.
Cool. Politics, information, money.
Yes.
Let's talk about money. What is money and why is it important to think about in the context of human rights?
I have witnessed money be peripheralized. It has taken a back seat in the human rights conversation. The idea of currency, who makes the money, who makes the rules, who issues it, who sets the interest rates, all these things. It is not on the menu of human rights activists. If you just do like a systematic study of like the human rights discourse over the last several decades, money is not there. It's also not really taught in schools. Like children don't really learn about money. Where does it come from? It's kind of hidden from a lot of our discourse. Only really when I got into Bitcoin did I start learning more about money. I spent 10 years at the Human Rights Foundation, and we did all kinds of programs around the world. We convened Oslo Freedom Forums in different places, and I got to meet hundreds of dissidents. And very rarely did they ever speak about currency or bank accounts or moving money from one place to another. But when I started asking them, they always had amazing stories about money, always. I mean, my friend Ivan Mawire, who started the This Flag movement in Zimbabwe, which ended up toppling Robert Mugabe. When I asked him to come to San Francisco to give a talk about hyperinflation, which he lived through, he said, no one's ever asked me to do that before, but I'll come. And he came. This was about 3 years ago. And the first thing he did when he got on the stage is he opened up his shirt and he brought out a necklace that had the 1980 Zimbabwean dollar on it. And he said, we in the activist community wear this as a symbol of where our country used to be, because the Zimbabwean dollar used to be worth 2 British pounds. And then, of course, over the next 2.5 decades of economic mismanagement and corruption by Mugabe, it got inflated out of existence, right? You've seen those like $100 trillion Zimbabwean notes. So he had to live through that, which was terrible and crushing. But he, is an expert on money. If you actually talk to human rights activists about money, they know a lot about money. They're just not usually asked to talk about it. So, for me, money, when I study money or look at money, it's really about control. Who is creating it and how much does the population know about the creation of that money? And when it comes to Bitcoin, it's really the people's money. Like there is no shadowy force in charge of it. We all know the rules. We all know how it's going to get minted and how it's going to get printed. And, that information is out there for everybody to see. And there's no like special group of rules for one group of people or another group. A billionaire and a refugee are the same in the eyes of the protocol. This is a rather revolutionary concept. And in the same way that democracy allowed us to decentralize politics and have checks and balances, and in the same way that the internet is this culmination of technologies that allowed us to decentralize information, access to and control over it. Bitcoin, decentralizes money. I mean, no longer, again, is there one group of people who can just change it arbitrarily. We're all on the same playing field. And I think that is a tremendous innovation.
From one perspective, money and inflation, hyperinflation, is a kind of symptom of corruption as opposed to the core of the corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And at the flip side, in terms of resisting the corruption, resisting the abuse of human rights, it's interesting to think that fighting inflation or fighting the mismanagement of the money supply is a way to fight back authoritarianism or to fight authoritarianism. And that's an interesting concept that I think was introduced to me by just plugging myself intellectually into the Bitcoin community, but also just cryptocurrency in general.
Mm-hmm.
It's to like, it's not that money is a symptom. Money is a tool to fight back too.
Absolutely.
How that happened.
What role does money play in all of this? Is money a huge influence in politics, super PACs, all that kind of stuff? Or is this more just kind of a narrative that we play with? Because from the outsider's perspective, that seems to be one of the fundamental problems with modern politics.
So I was just having this conversation, Marshall Kosloff, my co-host on the realignment. And it's funny because if you do enough research, we actually live in the least corrupt age in American campaign finance. As in, it's never been more transparent.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been more up to the FEC, and all of that. If you go back and read not even 50 years ago, we're talking about Lyndon B. Johnson handing people, like literally he came up in his youth, paying people for votes, like the boss of the person who like had all the Mexican votes, like the person who had, and he was like giving out briefcases. This is like within people's lifetimes who are alive in America. So that doesn't happen anymore. But I don't like to blame everything on money, although I do think money is obviously a huge part of the problem. I actually look at it in terms of distribution, which is that how is money distributed within our society? Because I firmly believe that politics, this is going to get complicated, but I think politics is mostly downstream from culture. And culture, obviously, I'm using economics because there's obviously a huge interplay there. But like in terms of the equitable or lack of equitable distribution of money within our politics, what we're really pissed off about is we're like, our politics only seems to work for the people who have money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's largely true. I think that the reason why things worked differently in the past is because our economy was structured in different ways. And there's a reason that our politics today are very analogous to the last Gilded Age, because we had very similar levels of economic distribution and cultural problems too at the same time. I don't want to erase that because I actually think that's what's driving all of our politics right now.
So that's interesting. So that's one. So in that sense, representative government is doing a pretty good job of representing
it is.
The state of culture and the people and so on. Yeah.